The Zorvath Dominion had never known failure. Every Deathworld they encountered, they conquered. Their warriors, bred in the unforgiving environments of their homeworld, crushed all opposition with terrifying efficiency. Planets with crushing gravity, toxic atmospheres, and monstrous wildlife had all fallen under their rule. No species had withstood them for long. Their empire now spanned across hundreds of star systems, and their latest conquest had been swift. Another Deathworld stripped of resistance and absorbed into their ever-expanding domain. Fleetmaster Zalcor stood on the bridge of his command warship, the Vorax Claw, watching the live tactical feed of their next target, Sol 3, known by its native inhabitants as Earth. A blue-green world, teeming with life, it appeared at first to be another routine conquest. The only anomaly was its dominant species, Homo sapiens, a bipedal mammalian race that had managed to spread across the entire planet. Their technology was primitive compared to the Zorvath, with no known warp capabilities and only basic orbital defenses. The initial intelligence reports suggested minimal resistance. Another Deathworld to fall, Zalcor muttered to himself, his mandibles clicking in anticipation. His officers stood behind him, watching the data scroll across their monitors with practiced ease. High Command had already authorized the invasion. Fleetmaster Zalcor turned to his second, a younger warrior named Virik. Deploy the scouting teams. Let us see if these Terrans are as fragile as they appear. Virik nodded and transmitted the order. Across the fleet, scout ships disengaged from their docking clamps and descended toward the unsuspecting world below. The first phase of the invasion was always the same: test the planet's defenses, evaluate resistance levels, and determine the most efficient means of subjugation. The scouts landed in carefully selected locations: dense jungles, arid deserts, frozen tundras, sprawling urban centers, all chosen to gauge the full range of human adaptability. Their mission was simple: observe, report, and if necessary, engage in limited skirmishes. Zalcor expected nothing more than the usual signs of disorganized resistance, perhaps some localized military forces attempting a futile defense before their inevitable collapse. The first reports came in within hours. The scouts had landed in the Amazon rainforest, expecting to establish forward positions and assess local fauna threats. The transmission started normally, vital signs stable, environmental scans within expected parameters, until it abruptly cut off. Confused, the fleet attempted to re-establish contact. Nothing. Minutes passed. Then another scout team, this one in the deserts of Australia, went dark. More teams followed. What had initially seemed like a mere technical glitch quickly spiraled into concern. Zalcor clenched his claws against the armrest of his command throne. Something was wrong. A distress signal broke through the static, a garbled message from a surviving scout team. "This is Unit 6, requesting immediate evac. They are not primitive, they are hunting us." The signal dissolved into static and silence followed. The fleet officers exchanged uneasy glances. This was unexpected. No Deathworld species had ever hunted Zorvath soldiers before. They were the apex predators, the conquerors. And yet, in the dense jungles of Earth, something had turned their scouts into prey. Zalcor's eyes narrowed. "Deploy the first wave," he ordered, his voice colder than before. If these creatures thought they could challenge the Zorvath, they would soon learn the true meaning of war. The warships above Earth began their descent, and drop pods rained down from the sky, carrying the might of the Dominion to the surface. The invasion had begun. The first wave of Zorvath warriors descended onto Earth in a flawless execution of standard invasion protocols. Drop pods slammed into the surface, releasing armored infantry into what should have been an easy conquest. The jungles, deserts, tundras, and urban centers of the planet had all been marked for deployment, each location carefully chosen to test the adaptability of the native species. Fleetmaster Zalcor stood on the bridge of Vorax Claw, arms crossed, watching the live feeds from his warriors on the ground. He expected resistance, but nothing beyond what countless other Deathworlds had shown before: uncoordinated militias, failing defenses, and an inevitable surrender once the true might of the Dominion was demonstrated. The early transmissions suggested nothing out of the ordinary. Then they stopped. At first, it was dismissed as atmospheric interference. Earth's weather patterns were chaotic, its magnetic field strong, and the planet's biosphere was dense with electromagnetic signals from primitive technology. But as more units went silent, scouts and entire battalions alike, concern crept through the ranks of the fleet officers. Zalcor leaned forward, mandibles twitching. "What is happening down there?" he growled. He opened a direct channel to one of the remaining intact squads. The video feed flickered to life, showing a group of Zorvath warriors in formation, their plasma rifles raised. Smoke and fire filled the air. "Fleet Master, we are under heavy attack. These creatures, they are not what we expected." The transmission cut out, and for several long moments, there was silence on the command bridge. Then, a new signal came through, this one from the tundra regions. A surviving officer, wounded and breathing heavily, appeared on the screen. "Sir, the cold, it kills us. Our thermal armor is failing, and the humans, they thrive in it." His eyes darted off-screen as the sound of gunfire echoed in the background. "They were nothing but light coverings, and they move faster than we can react. They set traps. They wait. We are being hunted." His image distorted, then disappeared. Zalcor clenched his fists. This was not how Deathworld conquests went. The jungle forces had vanished. The tundra teams were freezing. Reports from urban centers indicated a nightmare of urban warfare, with human forces striking from the shadows, cutting off supply lines, and setting up ambushes with terrifying precision. The cities were labyrinths of death, each building a fortress, every street a battlefield. Zorvath warriors, trained to fight in open combat, found themselves overwhelmed in the chaos. Human soldiers used their knowledge of the terrain to devastating effect, turning every broken street and ruined structure into a death trap. The reports were filled with horrifying details: snipers firing from seemingly nowhere, buildings collapsing with entire squads inside, explosive traps hidden in abandoned vehicles. Entire regiments were vanishing without a trace, and still, the humans refused to fight like a conventional army. They fought like predators. They fought like they enjoyed it. A report from the Australian desert came through next. The officer's voice was panicked. "They know this land better than we do. They can track us through the sand. They do not need water the way we do. They draw us in and wait for us to collapse. We thought this was barren land, but to them it is home. They live here." The feed cut out again, replaced by an automated distress beacon. Zalcor turned to his second, Virik, who stood frozen, his own claws twitching in barely concealed fear. The fleet master spoke slowly, his voice laced with disbelief. "Are you telling me that the species, these primitive mammals, have adapted to every extreme environment on this planet?" No answer was needed. The reports spoke for themselves. The Zorvath were supposed to be the apex predators, the perfect warriors, evolved to dominate lesser species. And yet on Earth, they had found something far worse. Humanity did not just survive a death world. They had mastered it. Panic spread through the Zorvath ranks. Attempts to regroup were met with more ambushes. Desperate retreat signals were intercepted and blocked. The humans were jamming their communications, feeding false information into their systems, and turning the Zorvath's own technology against them. Then came something even more unsettling: psychological warfare. The Zorvath had always conquered through fear, breaking the spirits of those they invaded. But now, the humans were doing it to them. A broadcast played on an open frequency, hijacking their network. It was a video montage of human history, wars, revolutions, destruction, and defiance. Battles where they had fought against impossible odds and emerged victorious. Images of entire cities reduced to rubble, only for the people to rise again, stronger than before. A voice, speaking in flawless Zorvath, echoed through their comms. "No invader has ever left this world unbroken. You will not be the first." Zalcor's mandibles tightened. He knew what was happening. The invasion was failing. The Zorvath had made a critical mistake. They had underestimated the true nature of Earth. They had assumed it was another death world to conquer. But now they understood the truth. Earth was worse than any death world they had ever faced. And the humans, they were the reason why. The Zorvath Dominion had never suffered a defeat like this. Fleetmaster Zalcor stood motionless on the bridge of Vorik's Claw, his mind reeling as he watched the disastrous reports flooding in from every front. What was meant to be a swift and overwhelming conquest had turned into a slow-motion catastrophe. The humans were relentless, striking in ways the Zorvath had never encountered before. Their tactics were not just defensive, they were predatory. They attacked from the shadows, using their own cities, forests, deserts, and tundras as weapons. The Zorvath had fought in countless environments, but never against a species that thrived in all of them. Zalcor watched as his forces tried to retreat from urban zones, but the humans had anticipated it. The roads they used for evacuation were mined. Entire battalions disappeared when buildings collapsed on top of them. In the Amazon, jungle warfare became a waking nightmare. Zorvath warriors, born and bred for combat, found themselves outmatched, not just by the terrain, but by the planet itself. The humidity corroded their armor. Their sensors were useless against the dense foliage. Their enemies moved like ghosts, appearing only to strike before vanishing again. One squad sent a final transmission. It's the trees. They used the trees. Then silence. Desperation took hold. The Zorvath abandoned tactical positions and regrouped, forming larger encampments to fortify against the unpredictable assaults. But that only made them easier targets. The humans had weapons the Zorvath had never encountered before. Not just their crude ballistic firearms. Those were primitive but effective. It was their ingenuity, their ability to adapt. They hacked into Zorvath communications, feeding false coordinates and misinformation. They disrupted supply lines, ensuring Zorvath forces starved while humans seemed to have endless rations. Worst of all, they did something the Zorvath had never encountered in all their conquests. They laughed. Surviving transmissions captured it. Human soldiers in the middle of battle, exchanging jokes while bullets flew past them. Some of them mocked the Zorvath over the stolen comms, their voices filled with amusement rather than fear. You guys really thought this was a death world? Cute. Others played eerie music through intercepted frequencies, sometimes even broadcasting past military speeches from their own history, words that spoke of defiance, resistance, and the refusal to bow. It sent a chill through the ranks of the Zorvath warriors. No species had ever done this before. Every Deathworld species they had conquered fought desperately, clinging to survival until they were overwhelmed. But humans, they enjoyed the fight. They treated it like a challenge. Fleetmaster Zalcor turned toward his officers, their expressions unreadable but their body language betraying their unease. The casualty numbers were staggering. This was not a war they could win. He had known it for hours now, but his pride refused to acknowledge it. Until now. Begin full retreat, he said finally, his voice heavy. Pull all surviving forces back to the fleet. Virik, his second, hesitated. Fleetmaster, the humans. They will not let us leave, will they? Zalcor finished for him. The realization settled over him like a weight. The humans had planned for this. No one had ever forced the Zorvath to retreat before, and now that they had, they were making sure it was not an option. More reports flooded in. Human warplanes were tracking retreating forces, wiping them out before they could reach extraction points. Those who made it to their landing craft found them sabotaged, wiring torn out, fuel lines cut. And then came the final blow. The orbital fleet, once the source of the Dominion's power, was under attack. The humans had no starships capable of challenging Zorvath battleships in direct combat. But that didn't stop them. They used ingenuity, physics, and sheer audacity. Kamikaze drones overloaded with explosives crashed into Zorvath engines. Satellites were repurposed as kinetic bombardment weapons, slamming into hulls with devastating force. The humans had even repurposed their outdated nuclear missiles, firing them in synchronized waves that overwhelmed Zorvath energy shields. Zalcor gritted his mandibles. This was not just a loss. This was an annihilation. The humans had turned their own planet into a weapon and wielded it with terrifying efficiency. His mind reeled at the thought. Every Deathworld species they had conquered before had adapted to survive their environments. But humans, they had mastered theirs so completely that they could turn any landscape into a battlefield of their choosing. They were not prey. They were not even just another predator. They were something worse. They were dominant. The Fleetmaster slammed his fist against the console. Send a surrender transmission. The words felt foreign, almost impossible to say. The Zorvath had never surrendered in their history. But there was no choice. They had learned the hard way that Earth was not just another death world. It was the death world. And humanity was its apex species. The Zorvath Dominion had never experienced defeat before Earth, and now they faced the unthinkable, negotiating surrender. Fleet Master Zalcor stood inside the war chamber aboard the last remaining Zorvath flagship, his exoskeletal fingers clenching and unclenching as he watched the holographic display of the ruined battlefield below. Earth was still burning, but the fires belonged to the wreckage of his own forces. The once mighty Dominion fleet had been reduced to a scattering of crippled warships, surrounded by human vessels, primitive in comparison, yet undeniably effective. The silence in the chamber was suffocating. Every officer present knew the gravity of this moment. No Zorvath warrior had ever surrendered. To do so was to bring disgrace upon their kind. Yet, to continue fighting was no longer an option. The humans had proven relentless. No matter how many strategies Zalcor had attempted, they adapted. They turned the very environment against the invaders, used unconventional, savage tactics that made every retreat a slaughter. And worst of all, they enjoyed it. Even now, intercepted human communications played in the background, voices laughing, soldiers swapping stories about how they had personally crippled Zorvath supply lines, booby-trapped their encampments, or turned their own weapons against them. This was not a desperate species fighting for survival. This was a species that thrived in war. The communication channel to the Terran Command Center opened with a flickering blue glow. Admiral Sarah Carter's image appeared before them. Unlike the Zorvath, who adorned themselves in polished battle regalia, she stood in simple fatigues, her uniform streaked with dust and dried blood. There was no elaborate headdress, no ceremonial armor, just the quiet, unshakable confidence of a leader who had already won. Her piercing eyes locked onto Zalcor. "Fleet Master," she said, voice steady. "I assume you've called to discuss terms." Zalcor felt a flicker of rage. To be spoken to like this by an inferior species, one that had only just been discovered by the greater galaxy, was humiliating. Yet, there was no denying reality. The Zorvath Dominion was finished here. He straightened, mandibles tightening before he finally spoke. "The Dominion acknowledges the strength of your forces." The words were bitter on his tongue. "We are prepared to negotiate a ceasefire." Carter tilted her head slightly as if amused. "Ceasefire," she repeated. "Fleet Master, I don't think you understand your position. This isn't a ceasefire. This is an unconditional surrender." The room around Zalcor tensed, his officers shifting uncomfortably, but no one dared to protest. The humans had them surrounded. Their fleets had been crippled, their troops either dead or captured. There was no negotiating position. Zalcor exhaled sharply. "What are your terms?" Carter didn't hesitate. "You will transmit the locations of all remaining Zorvath forces still hiding on our planet. They will disarm and await capture. All Dominion warships will power down weapons and shields immediately. You will transmit data on all known Dominion conquests, every species you have subjugated, every death world you have claimed." She stepped closer to the projection, her expression dark. "And then, Fleet Master, you will take that broken fleet of yours, return to your Dominion, and deliver a message." Zalcor stared at her. "A message?" Carter's voice was ice. "You came here thinking you could do to us what you've done to every other species in the galaxy. That Earth was just another death world to conquer. But you failed to understand something critical. We are not like the others." Her eyes burned with the intensity of a predator, the same look Zalcor had seen in countless soldiers who had ripped his warriors apart on the battlefield. "Humanity doesn't just survive. We overcome. We thrive in chaos. You didn't just fight humans, Fleet Master. You fought our storms, our jungles, our deserts. You fought a planet that forged us through fire, ice, and war. You fought Earth itself." Zalcor felt a deep, chilling realization settle into his core. The humans weren't just another race. They were something different, something terrifying. He had underestimated them from the beginning, and now the Dominion was paying the price. For the first time in his life, he felt true fear, not just for himself, but for his entire species. If the humans ever decided to take the fight beyond their own world, the Zorvath Dominion would be next. Carter continued, her tone unwavering. "You will leave here and tell the Dominion what happened. Tell them that humanity is not to be touched. That Earth is no death world you can claim. That if they ever set foot here again, We will not just defend ourselves. We will come for you. The silence in the war chamber was deafening. Zalcor knew, in that moment, that he had no choice. He turned to his officers and gave the order. Dominion ships began to power down. Weapons were deactivated. The war was over. But as Zalcor looked back at Admiral Carter, he realized the true horror of this moment. The humans had not merely survived an invasion. They had won. They had adapted. And worst of all, they had learned. As the Zorvath fleet limped away from Earth, carrying the message of their failure, Zalcor knew that the Dominion would never be the same. The galaxy had long feared the Zorvath as conquerors, as rulers of the Deathworlds. But now they had to reckon with a new force. A force unlike anything they had ever faced before. Humanity. And humanity had just begun.